Tora na donta skelta frigwe ta na skala na fata is na queenie good loot van rodok
Chapter 14. They rode in silence, sombre as a funeral cortege. Nòraidh felt like a stranger among them, an intruder in the midst of a family's grief. Each Anne's body lay lashed to the back of Angus's horse. Though they had wrapped it carefully in the clan's tartan, the cloth was not long enough to hide his full length. One stiff foot jutted out beneath the fabric, swaying with every step of the animal. That mechanical motion churned her stomach. Had she eaten breakfast, she would have retched at once. But she had not tasted a bite since dawn, and the nausea lingered in the hollow of a starving belly. She had never seen a corpse, or rather she had never truly looked at one, but she knew it was there. However much she tried to convince herself that the bundle was merely baggage, that inert foot made sure to remind her otherwise. Fate had willed that she ride precisely each Anne's horse, as if death itself lurked beneath the saddle. The men of the Highlands hemmed her in on all sides, like shepherd dogs circling a wayward ewe to keep her from fleeing. And yet she would flee. Oh yes, she would. Giving her a horse had been recklessness, though it came as a blessing. She preferred this 1,000 times over the suffocating closeness of MacCoinnich. Still, it rankled to think that, had she been a man, they would not have granted it so lightly. Did they truly believe that because she was a woman, she lacked the cunning or the courage to escape? They were wrong by all the saints. She would do it the moment the first chance arose. Weariness hounded her. 2 nights without sleep left her swaying in the saddle, and each passing hour carried her farther from Bale and Aquila, shrinking her chances of salvation. Desperation forced her to improvise. She began secretly tearing small strips from her petticoat, letting them fall like crumbs to mark a trail. A childish expedient, perhaps, but it was all she could do. So far no one seemed to have noticed, and she gave silent thanks for it. But when the sun began to dip, the method grew harder. The dress was already hacked up to her knees, and tearing fabric without being seen was a feat. Besides, she feared that in the dimness of night the fragments would be impossible to find. Old Thomas never stopped shooting her looks of rancor, resentful over the thwarted escape of the night before. She did not care a whit. She had no need of the favor of a stubborn old man she scarcely knew. What could the opinion of an enemy matter, when his company would be brief? Beethan, by contrast, was a mystery. She was almost certain she had seen him notice her tear a piece of cloth hours earlier, and yet he had kept silent. Only now and then did he cast her a thoughtful glance, revealing nothing. Had he discovered her? She did not know. And she would soon find out, because it was time for another tear. She cautiously lifted the hem of her skirt, feigning indifference. No one seemed to be watching. Quickly she ripped off a piece and clenched it in her fist. Her heart hammered in her chest. It was time to drop it. Then she made a mistake. She looked up and met MacCoinnich's eyes. The air froze in her lungs. He was turning his head toward her, his face impenetrable, devoid of any emotion. He held her with his gaze as if he had seized her bodily. Nòraidh felt herself crumble beneath that weight, unable to move so much as a finger. Let it go, she ordered herself. He would not notice. With so many hooves pounding the earth, it would be impossible to distinguish a scrap of cloth. And yet she could not do it. His gaze pinned her in place, like a red-hot iron. At last he looked away. He turned his attention back to his son. Nòraidh's heart dropped into a strange emptiness, struck by a pang of abandonment she had not expected. She was startled to discover that she did not want to be ignored again. She watched him ride beside the boy, speak to him in a low voice, draw laughter from him, stroke his hair with tenderness. And the sight tore at her. A dark, unfamiliar stab like bitter envy pierced her soul. It was not fair. She should not feel it, and yet it hurt her. That complicity between father and son revealed a secret fissure within her, a void she had not known how to name until that moment. A deep hollow. a lack that ached like a freshly opened wound. Nòraidh's fate. She had spent her whole life trying to fill that void with indifference and resentment. And yet in a single day that clan, the MacCoinnich and his son, had torn away the blindfold and laid her wound bare. Nòraid watched the way the laird rested his hand on the boy's shoulder, how he leaned toward him, almost into a furtive embrace, as if he feared showing tenderness before his men yet could not restrain it. Her heart burned with a strange pain while her eyes brimmed with tears. She had never felt a hand settle on her shoulder in affection, nor the warm brush of a caress upon her cheek. Her eyelids closed, and against her will memory dragged her under, the moment he brushed her cheek with an unexpected delicacy, the low timbre of his voice. The recollection sent a shiver through her, making her yearn for what she should never have desired. What a shameful longing! An unworthy sorrow. Like a Jezebel, unconcerned with the name or honor of her lover, caring only for his presence when night fell, she yearned for the touch of her enemy. Even knowing that desire was sin. Even knowing that man had deceived her father. Even knowing that her father still claimed her. She was still clutching a scrap of cloth between her fingers, when an unfamiliar voice tore her from her thoughts. She turned and found Beithan beside her, watching her with the hard expression of one who expects an answer. To what question? She had not even heard him approach. A stab of guilt quickened her pulse, as she remembered what she hid in her hands. She tried to tuck it into the folds of her skirt. The young warrior scrutinized her with disdain, a disdain that belied the youthfulness of his face. I said that a sweet voice and a little song are not enough to bewitch our men, woman. It took Nòraid a moment to understand. Then she recalled the lullaby she had sung to Arthur the night before and straightened, offended. I have not tried to bewitch anyone, she replied, with a calm that cracked under humiliation. So much the better, he answered with a cruel smile, because that is exactly what you've done. Anger set her cheeks aflame. She wanted to fling the scrap at his face but restrained herself, that fragment could betray her. The squire went on, venomous. I do not understand why the laird protects you, nor why he insists on saving you from that cursed bastard who sired you. I have no such scruples. Because of you, Echan rides lifeless on Angus's horse. Because of you, do you hear me, woman? Nòraid stared at him in disbelief. Did he dare blame her for that man's death? How dare you, she whispered, fury held tight in her throat. I do not know what fate befell Echan, but whatever it was, it came from his deeds, not mine. And on that I stake my word. The giant shrugged. So you say? Fear struck her suddenly, kindling a spark of hope. What if? My father, she asked, unable to hide her anxiety. No, Beithan cut her off with a disdainful gesture. Then he added sharply, you are not so fortunate. He will not be rid of you so easily, I swear it by God. Nòraid blinked, disoriented. What do you mean? The young man shook his head brusquely, as if finding her too dull to merit an explanation. I did not come to speak to you about that bastard, he leaned toward her whispering. I came to tell you to drop that damned scrap at once. Startled, she clenched it tighter, hiding it deeper in her skirt. Beithan's lips twisted in contempt. Let it fall. Nòraid glanced around, fearful. I am not going to betray you, he said with an impatient growl. Believe me or not, I want you gone more than you do yourself. But with that cursed cloth in your hand, you will end up wandering in circles until you return to the camp. Confused, she cast a glance toward MacCoinnich. He was with his son, suspecting nothing. He did not want her. He could not want her. And why should he? A pang tore through her as she realized that part of her wished he did. Fool! Drop it, Beithan insisted, almost pleading. She looked at him doubtfully. What if it was a trap? But if he had wanted to betray her, he needed only go to the laird. And he had not. Unless you wish to stay, he murmured, with a spark of mockery. His blue eyes pierced her fiercely. Do you already love the MacCoinnich, Sassenach? Do you long for him to desire you? The blush betrayed her. With a sharp gesture she opened her hand, and the scrap fell, fluttering down to the dust beneath the hooves. Beithan smiled in triumph. You see, it was not so difficult. Scott. Nòraid spat, as if hurling a curse. The young man did not flinch. I too hope to be rid of you soon. She returned his gaze, brimming with venom. You are an ogre. Do you always make a habit of abusing the weaker ones? Beithan's mocking expression twisted into a somber grimace, as if Nòraid's question had struck deeper than she had expected. Splendid. Better still. I would rather be an orc, he growled, than an insolent brat. Nòraid straightened with ferocity. I am not a brat, you utter fool. Her eyes swept over him with disdain. And for your information, I am tall for a woman, unless of course all your maidens in Scotland are ogresses. When her words failed to provoke the reaction she sought, she added with biting malice, or perhaps you do not know because none of them has ever wanted you near. The blush climbed Beithan's neck until it set his face ablaze, and Nòraid was surprised to discover she had struck a raw nerve. With his bearing, she would never have believed the giant suffered hardships with women. His eyes were blue, clear as a winter sea, and his features noble, well-carved. He lacked the rugged virility of the MacCoinnich, but he was nonetheless undeniably handsome. Remorse pricked her chest, though she told herself Beithan deserved it. Have you no woman, Beithan? She asked with a hint of softness, as if she wished to bind the wound she had just opened, though she did not quite understand why. The young man straightened even more, and answered with surly pride. I have a dog. What need have I of a woman? He turned away, glowing like an ember, and Nòraid had to bite her lip not to smile at such clumsiness. Holy Mary, even in the shadows of Arhane Hygeia, she had seen enough to know what a man needs from a woman. She is a clever bitch, Beithan added defensively, not daring to look at her. The cleverest I have ever known. Nòraid remained silent. And loyal, he insisted, his voice cracking. The temptation to laugh nipped at her, but instead she watched him with a mixture of tenderness and bewilderment. She almost wished to cross that invisible space between them, to lay a hand on his arm and comfort the spurned giant. But then he scratched his side and neck in a rather desperate way, making her shudder. Could it be that he shared fleas with his faithful companion? What are you staring at, woman? Beithan snapped suddenly, snorting angrily when he caught her watching him. Nòraid started, immediately averting her gaze. She decided she would waste no more words sparring with that ill-tempered colossus. By all the heavens, though she would never admit it aloud, she too would flee from a man like that. Hidden beneath his imposing shadow, she continued discreetly tearing little bits from her petticoat, and letting them fall like breadcrumbs along the path. And though she silently cursed the irritating presence of Beithan at her side, the man kept his word. He did not betray her. Chapter 15. To feel alive. Nòraid didn't know what she hated more, the imposing shadow of the giant riding beside her, the motionless foot peeking from beneath the corpse's blanket, swinging with the horse's steps, or the figure of the MacCoinnich, who led the group like an ancient god on his steed. The chieftain sat upright in the saddle like a pagan idol, tall and magnificent, his black mane flowing with the wind. The afternoon light caught the silver strands at his temples, as if they were ornaments forged in silver, a dazzling contrast to the youthful vigor of his face. His broad shoulders and powerful back revealed a strength capable of crushing her in an instant, and yet, with that very hand that could break her, he gently stroked his son's head. Nòraid didn't understand him. He had never spoken a harsh word to her, he had always been courteous. That mismatch, the latent brutality of his body against the delicacy of his gestures, confused her more than any threat. He could take from her whatever he wanted, and no one would stand in his way. None of the men riding around him would dare challenge him. They followed him with an obedience so natural it bordered on ridiculous. If any by mistake rode ahead of him, they hurried to rein in their mounts and return him to the lead, almost reverently. The MacCoinnich himself seemed unaware of this submission. He advanced with relentless pace, focused on the boy riding in his lap. His authority was innate, so deep that he didn't need to impose it. His mere presence was enough to command the clan. He was not a tyrant, she knew. If he had been, the giant escorting her would never have dared offer help. The way Beithan looked at his lord was proof enough. He did so convinced he was protecting him and with fierce zeal. And who would protect me from the MacCoinnich? Nòraid was sure he would not harm her, at least not with the sword. But what would become of her heart? Of her body, of her soul? Because she desired him, and that desire was a fire she didn't know how to quench. It was a dangerous yearning, seeping into her despite herself. And she wondered, what was it she really longed for? The tenderness of his deep voice? The touch of his hand? His love? The very thought filled her with shame, and yet her gaze returned to him again and again. The chieftain wore little, a short tunic and the plaid carelessly draped over one bare strong glowing leg. Every breeze lifted the tartan, offering fleeting glimpses of his manhood. Nòraid tried to look away, but it was impossible. The magnetism of that man suffocated her, defeated her, intoxicated her. Her heart galloped in her chest as she remembered him lying beside her that time, when he took her hand over the plaid. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She was a woman, not a maiden, and she knew it. What she felt was no innocent mirage. It was not love. Perhaps it was simple desire, the ancient claim of her flesh, that call no man or woman could control. Wasn't lust as natural as the need to drink or breathe? Why were men allowed it, while women were forced to disguise it as love? Love, an oversized feeling perhaps non-existent. A weakness, a fiction. Yes, what consumed her was not love but desire. And though the MacCoinnich was her enemy, she longed for him as a woman longs for a man. Her body recognized him before her mind did. Her pulse quickened when a gust of wind lifted her enemy's plaid, and the sight burned her like fire in her blood. The sway of her own mount, the heat rising in her chest, made her shiver. Her hand rose instinctively to her neck, then down to her breast, trembling with the wave of sensations flowing through her. She closed her eyes, imagining that this was the touch of the MacCoinnich. He was the first man to awaken her body. The first whose touch she had eagerly desired. The first to make her feel alive. And that desire, fierce and primal, was welcome. Because Nòraid was not made of cold steel. She was flesh and blood. And she didn't need love to know it. Chapter 16. Coinneach placed his hand on his son's shoulder and squeezed it gently. It was a comforting gesture that masked the storm tearing him apart inside. Remember, Arhane? Silence fell over them like a shroud, as the boy struggled with his memories. I can't, father, he answered, uneasy. I only remember waking up. Coinneach glanced at him sideways, his brows furrowed. With Davy? The boy's whisper was barely audible. Don't be sad, my son. It's not your fault if you don't remember. Arhane nodded with childlike solemnity. Did they hurt you? Coinneach asked in a voice barely above a whisper, though steel lay beneath it. The boy shook his head. Good, his father said. If it had been otherwise, Coinneach would already have turned his horse to strangle the first Englishman he found with his own hands. Tell me again, son, then I'll leave you be. Repeat exactly what you remember from that night. I only remember eating, and feeling sleepy. And who was at the table with you? Old Thomas, he said uncertainly. A cold shiver ran through Coinneach. How much had they drugged his cup to wipe his memory like this? By some miracle, he hadn't died. Fury roared inside him, though his expression stayed calm. Only the violent clench of his jaw betrayed the anger burning beneath the surface. I already knew that. Was there anyone else, my son? Alice, Arhane exclaimed with sudden clarity. And Blanid, and Beithan. Almost everyone, Coinneach thought, except Thomas and Beithan. And Angus. But Angus had been caught up in another quarrel with old MacAilpein, over his youngest daughter. His cousin had long courted the red-haired girl, but MacAilpein had sworn never to give another daughter to a MacCoinnich. And he couldn't blame him. Isabel's death had not been his doing, but the blame had burned onto him like hot iron. He should have foreseen it, should have stopped it, and maybe he would have if he hadn't held in his arms the child of them both, Arthur. The boy had suffered too much from that abandonment. As if his mother had slapped him before disappearing. Coinneach hated her for that. And for leaving him with hands stained by her blood. In MacAilpein's eyes, he was a murderer. He had been the last to see her alive, and they had caught him by the window while Isabel's broken body lay on the rocks. That day, all hope for peace had fallen into the void with her. Had he pushed her? Or had he driven her to desperation to jump? To MacAilpein, there was no difference. He was guilty either way. And deep inside, Coinneach accepted it. He too knew he was responsible. He had not loved her as she deserved, though he had wanted to. She had been sparing with affection, distant, and he never managed to win her heart. But he had tried. By God, he had tried. The image of Isabel by the window still haunted him. Dishevelled hair, wide eyes, that unsettling smile that chilled his blood even now. He shook his head, pushing the memory away. "Don't you remember going to bed or waking in the middle of the night?" he asked the boy. "No, father. I remember nothing." Coinneach ruffled his hair tenderly. "Don't worry." According to Alice, the boy had fallen asleep over the haggis plate, and when she couldn't wake him, she carried him to bed. She had also succumbed to sleep, sitting beside him with her head resting on her arms. Blanid had fallen asleep in the kitchen. Thomas collapsed at the table. No one had seen a thing. How had they managed to lull everyone, without anyone noticing? Coinneach would find the answer. And he would find the culprit. His thoughts drifted toward the captive girl. Nòraidh, he didn't like that name. Besides, there was already an Alice in the house. Two were too many. He would have to find another for her, without imposing it harshly. Some name she herself would accept. When exactly had he decided to keep her by his side? He who needed no new battles of wills. He who knew she was not a beast of burden, but a woman with her own destiny. And yet, something in her stirred a fierce need in him to protect her from further wounds. She was still waiting for her father. It showed in her gaze, in the way she kept turning, expecting to see him emerge from the trees. Coinneach almost wished that bastard would follow them, just to have the chance to plunge his sword into his heart. The memory of dead Echan struck him suddenly. Who had killed him if not MacShimidh? What was the motive? The suspicion that betrayal came from within gnawed at him. Something was wrong. Something eating at his conscience, though he couldn't put his finger on it. Every time he got close to the truth, he heard again the melody of that woman's voice. "Sleep, my little one, sweet lamb." Where had he heard that song before? Whose was that voice? The memories slipped away. But Nòraigh's presence riding nearby was intense, almost unbearable. He knew she left scraps of fabric behind like breadcrumbs. He had seen it at the same time as Beethan, and decided not to stop her. The talk with Arthur was more important. Later he would collect enough scraps to ruin any escape attempt. But what he really wanted was to understand Beethan's attitude. He had expected him to reprimand the girl, yet instead, he helped her. It was obvious. As obvious as Nòraigh's looks. In them was absence, longing. She didn't desire him, he understood, but the warmth she saw between him and Arthur. And that lack tore him apart. He felt the irresistible urge to take her in his arms, and save her from all pain. On the razor's edge. Emotions churned inside him like two rival armies. By all the saints, if that girl kept looking at him with such silent hunger, he doubted he could hold back. After all, he was still a man who had gone too long without the warmth of a woman. Every day it grew harder to remind himself that she did not desire him, but something he could no longer give. Something long lost. He had once believed his heart could open, but now it lay sealed tighter than a tomb. And yet she drew him in. It wasn't just her youthfulness, though she was certainly beautiful. There was a mystery in MacShimidh's daughter, a force that unsettled him. No woman had disturbed him like this in years. Not even Isabel, with all her poison grace, had stirred him so. He had loved Isabel out of duty, never desire. To desire her would have been as unthinkable as loving a dagger lodged in his side. But this young woman, he desired her. When he had scolded her the night before, it wasn't only to keep her from temptation, it was also to deceive himself. The effect of her glances was unbearable, almost physical. His body responded with raw urgency, craving what she seemed to silently ask for. He might have been blind and still have felt the intensity of her presence, like a thirsty traveler sensing the scent of a hidden spring. He stood on a razor's edge. He turned his head and caught her looking at him directly. That boldness made his blood boil. The insolent girl held his gaze with eyes that seemed to know too much, as if harboring forbidden knowledge of the flesh that Coinneach was sure she could not possess, or could she? The mere possibility shook him, stirring forbidden images in his mind. His heart raced. What if it wasn't her he saw in those fathomless eyes, but the dark reflection of his own desires? Then something shifted in her gaze, a flash of defiance or maybe rebellion. Nòraidh cracked the reins, and Ichan's horse lengthened his stride with vigor. Coinneach realized with a jolt that this was not a flight, but the announcement of a different battle, more dangerous than any fought with swords. A subtle struggle that would demand patience, endurance, and survival through the madness when she, sooner or later, challenged him again with those eyes. Because by God, even as hostage and captive, she acted more like a capricious queen than a helpless prisoner. And she showed it in every outburst aimed at Beithan, in every dagger thrown with those insolent brown eyes, especially when they targeted him. Coinneach couldn't help but let his lips curl into a smile. But then he sighed, aware that those magnificent eyes were too expressive, too dangerous. Chapter 17. It was the expression on MacCoinnich's face that provoked her, that half-smile so insolent that made her feel mocked, as if he could read deep into her soul. Rogue! What could that man possibly know about her? Surely nothing of the storm raging in her mind, unless he were a sorcerer. The forbidden thoughts were hers and hers alone. The blush coloring her cheeks had nothing to do with desire, but with the hellish pace that devil from the Highlands imposed on them, relentless and unyielding since dawn. She was exhausted, and by God since midday she had been bearing a need she could no longer hide. Still she hadn't complained. She had sworn not to speak to any of those barbarians. Beithan, for example, seemed a flea-ridden fool to her, incapable of uttering a single kind word all day. The only virtue she could grant him was the almost ridiculous love he bore his dog, Nòraidh. She was certain he slept with the beast, and so she pictured him covered in fleas. To avoid catching any, she steered her mount away from his, stifling a laugh as she heard him brag to Cailín about the animal's feats. Cailín barely listened, offering a tired smile that betrayed this wasn't the first time he'd heard the tale. Then there was Thomas. The old man often watched her as if she were a riddle to be solved, and that scrutiny was unbearable, almost as much as the presence of the laird himself. She took comfort only in thinking that Thomas must believe his leader had lost his mind, for she caught him looking at her with a puzzled expression, as if he didn't quite understand what was happening. And MacCoinnich? With him, the battle was different. He stirred confusion, hope, and a tremor bordering on excitement. But she would rather die than admit it. At the end of her patience, she urged Ichan's horse forward and made her way to the front of the group. She pushed through the men amid a chorus of Gaelic curses, determined to confront the one who had invaded all her thoughts. Coinneach MacCoinnich. Even his name made her skin crawl. I demand we stop right now, she said firmly. He raised an eyebrow, a confident smile twitching on his lips that made her nerves tighten. Oh really, he replied, voice sharp as steel. And why exactly would you want us to stop? As he spoke he placed a reassuring hand on his son Artair's shoulder, and that paternal gesture, so unexpected, disarmed her more than any words. She forced herself to cling to anger. Because we need a rest, she answered, gesturing impatiently at the group. She felt the boy's inquisitive gaze, and suddenly felt ridiculous. She knew she was losing her mind. Peace had vanished the moment the Scot's eyes had settled on her. Since then, every thought was a fog. Now, meeting those burning amber eyes, thinking was impossible. In the depths of that gaze, she saw something undeniable: desire. It wrapped around her like tongues of golden fire, igniting her body with a liquid heat that made her tremble between fear and longing. Her senses gave way, her gaze settled on the man's mouth, and there it remained, captive, unable to look away. "Why do you wish to stop us, maiden?" MacCoinnich asked, voice deep and rough, like a whisper of distant thunder. Nòraidh's heart leapt. She swallowed hard and murmured uncertainly, "I need to rest." The weakness in her voice made her blush. He noticed, his lips curved even more, becoming a devastating weapon. "We've ridden all morning," she added with difficulty. MacCoinnich didn't reply, only let his smile widen, and Nòraid felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. She was like an orphan caught in sin, mute, defenseless. And he, by all the heavens, that man was painfully beautiful, in his face, in his tall posture, in the firm muscles of his bare arms. She, by comparison, felt dull and insignificant. No. He could not want her. If he showed interest, it would only be a cruel stratagem, a game of revenge against her father. Nothing more. And yet his voice, that Gaelic cadence, that sweet tone, tore her apart. It made her dream of what she could never have: a lover holding her in the shadows, warm breath in her ear, a touch of forbidden lips. "What ails you, girl?" MacCoinnich suddenly asked softly. She abruptly looked away, caught in thoughts too dark. "We've ridden all day without stopping," she protested hesitantly. "Without even—" She stopped, unable to say the obvious. She felt humiliated to allude to it before that man, and even more so to feel his compassion, which confused and hurt her in equal measure. How could he know her heart was held together by such fragile threads, that a whisper would unravel it? To him, she was no more than the daughter of his enemy. A tool in the balance of revenge. A harsh shout in Gaelic snapped her out of her reverie. MacCoinnich had given an order. His voice thundered, and she, frightened, thought it was against her. A shiver ran down her spine. Had she offended him? She didn't even remember what she had said. Suddenly the group changed course, leaving the valley to climb the wet slope of a hill. She was not broken. Coinneach spoke in a quick murmur to his son. The little boy nodded with serious innocence. Then with a sharp call he summoned his cousin Angus, entrusted the boy to him, and after one last glance at Nòraid, gave a brief order. In a single movement he leaned forward, grabbed the young woman's reins, and forced her off toward a hidden path that led to a secluded grove, away from the group. "Where are we going?" she asked, tense. "To where you'll find the rest you need," he replied, his voice hardened by anger, not against her but against himself. He cursed himself for having forgotten the most basic needs of the girl. His men would never have stopped to think of such things; they did what was necessary and nothing more. But that omission ate away at him, and even more painful was the memory of the look she had given him, a flash of humiliation and wounded pride that pierced him like a dagger. Damn his father's disdain, that man who had made her a pawn in a brutal game. Beneath the girl's pride her eyes revealed everything: longing, confusion, a pain too deep to hide. Coinneach had sensed it from the first moment, and his own body had betrayed him violently, as if he were an inexperienced teenager again, hands damp on the leather reins, unbearable tension in his gut. The sound of her voice alone, hoarse, steady, with that vulnerable vibration, dragged him into a vertigo he couldn't control. He had wanted to throw her from the saddle, pull her against his chest, and show her without words how much he cared, how much she dominated him. But the slightest sadness in her eyes disarmed him, leaving him suspended between fury and need. "And the others?" she asked, voice edged with anxiety. He kept his jaw tight, trying to soften the edge of his tone out of consideration for her. "They're looking for a place to set up camp." "Without us?" The girl bit her lip, eyes wide and dark mirrors of unease. The simple gesture forced him to moisten his dry mouth. Yes, she feared him. Feared being alone with him. And that idea, far from hurting him, excited him cruelly. We'll join them, he assured her, looking away. As soon as we're done. She frowned. Where? Over the hill. It's a secluded spot, no one will bother you. There's a lake nearby, you might want to cool off. He looked at her cautiously, watching every nuance of her expression. Then, almost without thinking, he let the name slip, Lilius. The sound hung softly among the trees, like a spell. It was a name fragile and strong at once, like a flower that blooms after the snow. She glared at him, face aflame. I'm not an animal to be named, she spat, hurt. Coinneach bowed his head. You're right. He found no other reply, and silence fell between them. He rode with her to the heart of the forest, where trunks rose dense and dark. There he stopped his horse and jumped down. You're not, he added quietly as if to correct a mistake. Nòraidh stayed rigid in the saddle. Coinneach moved to her side, ready to help her down. Then he made the mistake of looking her straight in the eyes. There were tears in her eyes. They shone despite her efforts to avoid his gaze. Something inside his chest tore. He had been wrong. And the fury burning in the young woman's eyes, a rage born of pain, pierced him with a pang of guilt. Since when did he care so much? He didn't know her, owed her nothing. He hadn't wanted to bring her with him, and yet he had. Because deep down he knew all at once, he could never have left her behind. She had touched something in him that had long been dead. From the first moment, she had broken through the shadows covering him, and with her mere presence had made a heart beat that he thought was hardened forever. In the saddle, upright like a wild statue, with her braid undone and dark eyes flashing between pride and vulnerability, she looked like a wild deer in a forest clearing, magnificent and dangerous. He watched her with hunger and reverence. It wasn't pity he felt, nor even compassion. It was pure admiration. She had suffered and survived, she was not broken. Her spirit shone with a freedom he had forgotten years ago. And he envied her for it. He remembered the first time he saw her, dripping wet after the daring of a night swim no lady would have even imagined. Even then, in her eyes, he had seen the spark of rebellion. Christ, he didn't want to break her. He wanted to join her. Because he had lived too long as a prisoner in his own life, only son, watched heir, shaped by discipline, deprived of youth under the weight of a whole clan. He had given everything to his people, to the last breath, and in the process buried his own light. And now suddenly, that light burned before him, in the form of a woman. Chapter 18. Coinneach had never known his mother, and so her absence still weighed on him like a grief etched into his skin. Sometimes, in rare moments, he thought he caught a glimpse of her faint smile, like a reflection shrouded in the mist of the oldest memories. But they were nothing more than ghosts. She had never held him to her chest, never given him a tender look. He didn't even know the color of her eyes, though memory, capricious, whispered they had been blue. He had never tasted the sweetness of her milk, nor felt that watchful care with which a mother observes her child's play. Isabel had also been a duty. She had demanded too much of him, yes, too much, and he carried that guilt like a suit of iron armor. He took on the full weight of her death, as always, in the name of duty. Her rejection, her choice to throw herself from the tower rather than stay by his side, had been the final blow that extinguished the fragile flame he kept burning. In a single instant, the fire of a whole life went out. And yet, the woman now facing him with such pride seemed like that same light reborn, a clarity beyond the threshold of his darkness. She called to him, inviting him to step out of the shadow he knew all too well. God, how badly he wanted to follow her. That heartbeat of weakness was his ruin. Nòraidh snapped out of their shared stupor, and reacted with the fierceness already burning in her eyes. Coinneach tried to snatch the reins, but it was too late. The young woman spurred Eichan's horse fiercely, the animal reared and bolted. Coinneach barely held on with a finger, struggling to stop her. The horse, confused, faltered, but she urged it on with greater force and he was dragged forward. The leather bit into his flesh, tearing it. A scream tore from his throat as he tried to free himself, knowing it would be his end if he failed. When he broke free, he tumbled to the ground. He felt the brutal weight of the horse nearly upon him, then the world shattered with a sharp blow to his head. Darkness closed in. Nòraidh took a moment to shake off the blindness of her fury. When she turned and saw the motionless body lying among the leaves, a cold horror gripped her chest. "Holy Mary," she whispered, frozen. Part of her wanted to run to him. Her heart skipped a beat. But another part, more desperate, turned her gaze toward the path to freedom. She would never have a better chance. Wasn't that what she had always longed for? To return to her father. And yet she couldn't. She couldn't leave him there. He was her enemy. A traitor. A man who had betrayed the Earl. And yet, he had been the only one to give her a name. Lilias. The mere memory of the sound on his lips made her heart ache. Like the intimate whisper of a lover, that word had torn down the wall behind which she hid her tears. Yes, she had loved him for a moment. Loved him, a fierce stranger she didn't even dare pity. The MacCoinnich lay still, the shadows of the forest covering him. Night was falling, and the memory of what had happened with Eachan chilled her blood. She could not bear to see the same fate repeated. With a sob, she turned the horse and dismounted beside him. She leaned down, her heart pounding in her chest. She pressed her cheek to his lips, searching for a breath of air. And when she felt it, warm, an almost painful relief overwhelmed her. "Thank God," she whispered, tears she could no longer hold back. Then a powerful hand caught the back of her neck. Coinneach's eyes snapped open, his lashes brushing her skin. The grip of his hand was firm, desperate. His breath burned against her face. "No," he growled, and that single word was neither an order nor a reproach, but a broken plea, the prayer of a wounded man. She shuddered. The strength in his arm was nothing compared to the desolation in his voice. "Don't go," he murmured, holding her close to his chest. Nòraidh felt her heart beating beneath the palm he had placed on it. "I was afraid," her voice cracked, "I was afraid I had killed you." Coinneach's lips moved against her skin. Warm, soft, dangerously sweet. Nòraidh trembled, overcome by a dizziness that chained her to that moment. She tried to pull away, fearing the betrayal of her own body, but he bent his mouth to her ear and in a broken whisper said, "Stay. Lilias." It tore his heart apart. Merciful Christ. Nòraidh thought she would die from the mere sensation of that plea brushing her ear, with Coinneach's breath burning against her skin, and the way it seemed to roam blindly over her face, like a lover deprived of sight, eager to recognize the woman he adores. His lips more than his hands explored her, and that touch was driving her mad. "Are you hurt?" she managed to whisper, barely in control. His fingers sank into the thickness of her hair, searching for signs of blood, though secretly he reveled in the softness of those dark strands. "No," he answered, brief and firm. Nòraidh exhaled a sigh of relief, barely a breath, before feeling another sting when Coinneach's deep voice whispered in her ear. "Why have you come back?" "I don't know," she confessed, for there was no lie that could justify her return. "And yet, I'm happier than I can say, girl." "I shouldn't have," Nòraidh murmured, trembling. "But you did," he replied with a certainty that left her no escape. "Yes," she admitted, swallowing hard just as the laird's lips slid over her skin again. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the burning touch of that contact, as if each kiss ignited another fiber of her being. She had never imagined that a heart, subjected to so much torment, could still endure without breaking. Nor that her skin could become so vulnerable. Nor that her body, despite the stone wall she had built around her soul, could cry out with such urgent, desperate desire. She remembered that inner strength she had built, brick by brick, with the help of a father who never loved her. Yes, he himself had handed her the bricks to lock herself in her own silence. But her spirit had longed for something else, to be free, to rise like a ghost through walls hungry for light. And now her flesh answered too, and God help her, for she found no strength to resist. Her fingers tangled, without meaning to, in the man's hair. She barely noticed the iron grip of his arms soften a little. "I'm sorry," Coinneach murmured, his voice breaking. "Forgive me, girl." His lips brushed her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted with the roughness of his hands, and pulled her close to his chest. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," Nòraid sobbed, believing it without doubt. After that she could think no more. Coinneach's hands sought her face just like that first night, and held it with the same delicacy as then. A touch so deep, so unexpected, it stole her breath and tore her heart. And Nòraid, powerless to hold back, cried. Chapter 19. The desire the maiden revealed so clearly made Coinneach's heart skip a beat, as if it refused to follow its course for a moment. That feeling struck him like a ray of sacred light, clearing the deepest shadows of his spirit. "I shouldn't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't want." The desperation vibrating in her words tore at Coinneach more than any enemy blade. He shouldn't desire her either. And yet he did. Eternal God, how much he desired her. With a steady gesture he lifted her face until their eyes met. "But do you want it?" he asked, his tone both a plea and a verdict. The young woman closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his. "No." He moved back just a little, searching her gaze. The forest twilight stretched around them, and the last rays of sun wrapped them in a golden cloak. Still Coinneach could see confusion and truth in those dark eyes. "I read it in your eyes, maiden," he insisted. She shook her head again, a brief gesture too fragile to convince him. "I must not," she repeated, more to herself than to him. Coinneach held her chin, forcing her to lift her face. His eyes burned into hers. "Your lips speak another language," he whispered. "And what they tell me is this." He brushed a slow kiss along the curve of her chin. Without thinking she tilted her head, and he covered her mouth with his. It was a restrained touch, like a man afraid to break what he most desires. Nòraid felt that caress deep within her being. Every touch on her lips drove her heart mad, as if her chest could no longer contain it. Holy Mary, she thought, how much I want him. Never in her life had she felt such a burning longing. What harm could there be in taking the little he offered? What mattered if everything ended in ashes afterward? Maybe that moment was her only chance to finally feel desired. To feel part of someone. Wouldn't she regret it more if she let it slip away? She knew he couldn't love her. She also knew she shouldn't love him. They were strangers, enemies, like two rivers that would never meet. But he wanted her. She felt it in every touch, in the restrained heat of his caresses. The laird's tongue traced her lips, and the shiver that ran through her was so intense it hurt her heart. Yielding to that contact's plea, she parted her lips. Then Coinneach's mouth invaded hers with a mix of sweetness and fury, igniting a fire inside her she could not contain. A broken, trembling moan escaped her throat, as she answered his kiss as if her life depended on it. She tasted an unknown joy in his mouth, so pure and devastating it seemed an impossible dream. It was everything she had longed for, and more. Coinneach pulled back just slightly, his lips still trembling against hers. "Say it now," he challenged in a rough whisper. "Say you don't want me." Nòraid kept her eyes closed, afraid that opening them would make the magic vanish. "Yes," she whispered, breathless, clutching the moment like a prayer. "Yes, I want you. May God help me. I want you." The wounds of her soul. At that bare, honest confession, a sharp pleasure like a wound ran through Coinneach, making him let out a groan. But then another pain, deeper and physical, forced him to grit his teeth as he tried to sit up and continue intoxicating the maiden with his kisses. "Ah! Christ," he murmured, closing his eyes against the stabbing pain that pierced him through and through. The young woman's startled gasp was audible. "Are you hurt?" she asked again, and in her voice was such concern that Coinneach felt a balm on the wounds of his soul. The truth was, he didn't even know. He barely remembered how he had ended up lying in the forest mud. When he woke, all he was aware of was the warmth of that face, the softness of that skin against his, the scent that enveloped and chained him more than any wound. He let himself fall back onto the damp ground, catching his breath before trying to move his legs. He managed it, though every muscle protested with excruciating pain. The anxious gesture from the girl forced him to force a smile. For now, nothing broken. The phrase sounded lighter than he felt. She still looked at him with furrowed brows, the delicate arches casting a shadow of doubt. Really? Coinneach moved his legs again, this time deliberately, though the motion made him grimace. With effort he sat up, his face hardened by the pain. Nothing broken, just battered. He winked, forcing a crooked smile. See the havoc you've caused me. The attempted joke got no response. Then, more seriously, he added, everything will be fine, I promise. Silence fell between them as he watched her under the dying light of the sun. He wished the spell would never break. At that uncertain hour, when shadows began to swallow outlines, the maiden's face still shone for him, clear and unforgettable. She could have worn rags, wrapped in that rough sack she'd emerged from, and she still would have seemed the most beautiful creature his eyes had ever seen. They looked at each other for what felt like timeless moments, as if the earth itself held its breath. I'm sorry I hurt you, Coinneach finally said, his voice low. He leaned on one hand and bent a knee to sit up straighter, never taking his eyes off her. It wasn't my intention. The young woman looked away, hiding her features in the play of light and shadow at dusk. He reached out gently and lifted her face so their eyes met again. It wasn't my intention, he repeated like an oath. She tried to turn away, to flee from that truth, but he wouldn't let her. Forced to hold his gaze, Nòraidh let out a choked sound, a mix of anger and heartbreak. Coinneach felt something inside him crack. His intentions had been good, God knew that, but in that moment he despised himself so much he could barely hold the silent accusation in the maiden's eyes. Then she began to cry. There in front of him, in the damp shadowy forest, she shattered like glass. Without thinking, cursing the pain that pierced him, Coinneach pulled her against his chest and held her with all the strength he had left, while her body trembled fragile in his arms. Chapter 20. The Oath of Coinneach MacCoinnich. Nòraidh clung to him, unable to reject the comfort of those strong arms that wrapped around her like a long-denied refuge. How many times had she yearned for an embrace like that? How many nights had she cried alone, with no one to hold her? Too many to count. And now for a moment she felt loved. As if the entire universe had decided to take pity on her wounded heart. She buried her face in the hollow of the warrior's neck, grateful that he couldn't see the flood of tears spilling over her. The sobs, however, escaped from her chest uncontrollably, trembling against his skin. She tried to stifle them, but it was useless, her whole body was shaking. What does it mean? She asked through tears. What maiden? He murmured, his voice deep and close. Lilius. The Scot looked at her intensely, as if wanting to imprint her soul onto his own. She slowly lifted her face, trembling from the heat of his breath and the weight of that gaze. It means Lily. Lily. Beautiful and sweet, whispered MacCoinnich. No, she muttered, almost in denial. Yes, maiden, he replied, not taking his eyes off hers. Adorable. And tilting his head, he brushed her lips with a light kiss, barely a caress. Sweet, he murmured before placing another tender kiss on her mouth. Nòraidh wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his heart battering against her ribs like a ram. Gratitude overflowed within her, almost painful. Thank you, she managed to say, silently begging him not to stop for the kiss to deepen. She wanted to give herself completely. She had nothing but her body, yet she offered it as if it were a treasure. A fragile flame of hope flickered again in her chest, trembling but alive. For a moment she thought he would do it, the way he looked at her, the uneven rhythm of his breathing, the fierce beating of his heart betrayed him. She was about to pull him close, hungry for the tenderness of his lips, for that silent promise pulsing between them. MacCoinnich leaned closer, so close she could feel the heat of his mouth, shivering with a sweet vertigo in her stomach. His arms held her tightly, his fingers dug into her flesh, and they remained joined in an intimate silence too long, until the opportunity dissolved like mist. We'd better go, he said at last. Nòraidh's heart filled with sorrow. Yes, she replied in a whisper, irritated. Before night falls. He laughed softly and squeezed her jovially. Maiden, it's already night. His laughter sparked an unexpected flicker of joy within her, and she found herself smiling, conspiratorial. "I hadn't realized." He laughed again, low and almost teasing. "Really?" But then his expression changed, turning suddenly serious. "Nòraidh," he murmured. The word fell on her like burning iron. It was a name she had accepted resignedly, marked by servitude, loneliness, and the humiliation of a lifetime. It wasn't hers, it didn't define her. Lilius, now that was a name. Like a lily, white and strong. The echo of his lips had awakened in her a yearning she could no longer contain. With a sad smile, barely aware of the weight of what she asked, she murmured, "Call me Lilius, if you wish." For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, leaning toward her, he let out a low murmur, full of truth. "Yes, maiden. I would like that very much." That night Nòraidh found no rest. Sleep eluded her, as if even the stars conspired to keep her awake. Her heart beat with the violence of a war drum, and every fiber of her being vibrated with the awareness of having the warrior lying beside her. How could she forget the shelter of his arms? There, for the first time, she had felt the certainty of belonging somewhere, and the bitter intuition that sooner or later she would have to leave. But she had to go. More determined than ever, she told herself it was the right thing to do. For Coinneach's sake, if not for her own father's. She couldn't drag MacCoinnich into her uncertain fate, nor allow him to give up what was rightfully his by blood. Not now, when she was just beginning to glimpse the possibility of reclaiming a lost father. And yet fear tore at her. What if she was wrong? What if what bound her to Coinneach was not just carnal desire, but something deeper, more dangerous? Her body longed for him, yes, but her heart and mind were beginning to surrender as well. She found herself tempted to love him. Every time she thought of him, her chest filled with conflicting emotions, sweet as honey and bitter as gall. Now, lying beside him in the shadows, she felt more alive than ever. Lilius. The echo of that whisper ran down her back like a caress of fire. When MacCoinnich said that name, it was so easy to let go, to dream awake, to imagine being loved, to see with the eyes of her soul the children she might one day bear, to remember the heat of his lips. She shut her eyes tightly, trying to stifle the daydreams that overwhelmed her. She must not. She could not give him her heart. She knew that he, without even meaning to, would end up crushing it as easily as she recalled that devastating smile that unsettled her so much. She shifted on the blanket, and the movement tugged at the tie still binding her wrist to his. She felt her throat close, a knot of anguish and desire. Tomorrow. She had to find a way to flee at dawn. Chapter 21. Blood and Mist. The maiden was plotting her escape. He had sensed it from the very first moment, betrayed by the restless eyes of the girl, always moving, always calculating. Excellent. Let her run if that's what she wanted. In secret, he waited for the moment she would stumble and be swallowed by the darkness of the forest, for the wolves to do to her what they had done to Ichan, that cursed traitor. Better that way. One less Sassenach in the world, and one less obstacle to his own revenge. Yes, everything would be simpler then. He could use the broken strap alongside Artair, finish them both, before reaching Creag Duv, where the boy would be placed under the watchful eyes of too many guardians. He had waited too long. And the waiting consumed him more than any wound. He would rather bleed out in battle, than delay his revenge one moment longer. No foreign woman would stop him from fulfilling his destiny. Damn Coinneach, he was blind, bewitched. He couldn't understand how that sharp-tongued Englishwoman had managed to ensnare him in her spells. He himself would never have noticed such a creature. And yet it was impossible to deny, he had seen in their glances what they tried to hide. The way they silently sought each other, as if only the other existed. Disgusting. Seeing the leader bend over her, protect her, had already been offensive enough. But knowing he had even stopped to pick up the scraps of cloth she left behind in her attempt to flee, that was truly unbearable. Coinneach was a fool. A foolish lover who is even more dangerous, and more vulnerable. The revenge would come soon. And when steel pierced MacCoinnich, when life spilled from him in torrents, then he would speak. He would whisper in his ear what would torment him in the last beats of his heart, just as he had dreamed of doing with Coinneach's father. Meanwhile he waited. Watched silently with a crooked smile, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
"What harm can there be in a bath in the lake?"
Nòraid challenged, a spark of defiance in her voice. She had almost convinced the men when Thomas, with the memory of an old crow, loudly recalled the time the girl had tried to escape by swimming at night. And she had almost succeeded. Most of those mountain men couldn't swim, that memory still burned them like an insult. Nòraid shot him a cold glance capable of curdling milk and replied, "MacCoinnich promised me I could wash, and I will." With that, she turned to the water with a silent, rebellious expression. Thomas blocked her path firm as a stone wall. Nòraid muttered a curse under her breath. May heaven strike down all those stubborn Scots. "You'll do it when MacCoinnich returns," the old man declared.
"Not a minute before."
Nòraid clenched her fists. She couldn't wait that long. "And when will that be?" she asked, impatience barely contained in her voice.
"Where is he?"
"Fixing the mess you caused," Thomas replied enigmatically, not moving from his post. "Stubborn old ram," she spat angrily. "Isn't it enough that you tore me from my home, tied me like a beast, and humiliated me with your captivity? Now you want to condemn me to live in filth? I'm not made to sleep on bare earth. I need to wash." "Bah!" Thomas grunted. "If it were up to me, insolent Englishwoman, I'd have left you to rot where you were. But for some reason beyond all logic, MacCoinnich wants you by his side. And I'll see to it that his will is done." Clever old man. Nòraid placed trembling but steady hands on her hips, in a gesture of defiance. "Oh really? And where, tell me, could I run?" The old man said nothing, but his eyes didn't leave her. Nòraid held his gaze, daring him to speak, though deep down she knew she planned to escape that very morning, even if it cost her life. Last night she had thought all chances were lost. But a miracle had intervened. Half asleep, she felt MacCoinnich rise and without thinking, release the strap that bound their wrists. She had remained in a stupor, too weak to even open her eyes, and he had gone. Where, no one knew. The truth was he still hadn't returned. And Nòraid had to escape before facing again that look that disarmed her, that bent her knees and set her soul on fire. Yes, she would run. If only she could trick the stubborn old man into letting her enter the water. "Or are you afraid of me?" she provoked with a venomous smile. But Thomas remained unmoved, watching her with the distrust one reserves for a witch ready to cast her spell and vanish in smoke. Nòraid might have laughed at the ridiculousness of his alert expression, his petrified guardian posture, if she hadn't been consumed by anger. "By all the gods," she exclaimed.
"It can't be true, where else could I go?"
Her gaze wandered to the horizon until it rested on her only hope, the place where the forest trees leaned over the lake, hiding its surface with their foliage, like decrepit elders drinking in secret. Beneath that green canopy, the darkness would protect her, if only for a moment. If only she could immerse herself in the waters. The horses waited tied up on the other side of the riverbank. A perfect opportunity. Nòraid raised an eyebrow with boldness, aiming to wound the vanity of those men.
"Surely among all of you.
How many are there?" She turned slowly, pretending to count one by one, then faced Thomas again. "At least 20. Do you really think you can hold back a single weak woman?" "Enough," Thomas growled.
"There's some truth in that, Thomas," Tormod replied with a hint of a smile.
"One woman shouldn't be a problem." Nòraid almost burst out laughing at how unconvincing he sounded. "I said enough," Thomas repeated sharply. "There's no shame in letting the lass wash." Bethan stepped forward, throwing her a look full of insolence. Nòraid almost felt gratitude toward him. Almost. Until he added, laughing so hard it shook his belly, "Better she bathes smelling as foul as she does. Don't you smell that English stench?" Nòraid narrowed her eyes in rage. If she didn't escape that very night, she would have liked to slap him across the face or shove his head in the mud until he shut up. How arrogant those Scots were. She was sick of their insolence. She turned again to Thomas, fury shining in her pupils. "Come with me if you distrust me so much. Dive in beside me." "So be it," Angus then commanded.
"Let her wash. But follow her.
And don't lose sight of her." The man's piercing gaze swept over her from head to toe, cold as a steel blade. Nòraid shivered. He tolerated her not one bit, and if it were up to him she would never have been granted even the smallest freedom. "Angus," Tormod protested irritably, "I don't need a bath. I'm not following her. Watching from the shore will do."
"Well, I will bathe." Caoilinn stepped forward with a lascivious tone that drew laughter.
"And I will too," MacAilpein added, conspiratorial, sharing with him a look heavy with obscenity. Their expressions froze Nòraidh's blood. An indecent spark had lit in their eyes, and soon that fire spread through the rest of the group, who glanced at each other, muttered in their language, and broke out laughing. Suddenly they began stripping off their clothes, dropping furs and shirts to the ground. Nòraidh's eyes grew wide. Good God! That wasn't what she had asked for. The men, naked like wild children, ran toward the lake. The shock pushed her to forget all caution. She let out a scream and rushed after them, plunging into the water. The icy surface struck her like a whip, stealing her breath, but she swam with all her strength toward the deeper waters. Damn it! She hadn't expected it to be so unbearably cold. When she finally stopped, her legs no longer touching the bottom, she turned to see if anyone was following. What she saw left her stunned, the warriors naked like fawns, splashing and chasing each other with shouts, throwing water at one another in a grotesque ruckus. There was no desire in their eyes, only childish primal laughter. Only Thomas, Beithan and Angus remained on the shore. Angus stepped aside without even looking at her, laughing and shaking his head. Beithan, however, stayed there, scratching his crotch awkwardly, a gesture that more than obscene seemed like an urgent need. Nòraid realized then that this brute was the only one who really needed a bath to get rid of the fleas eating him alive. For a moment she almost advised him to dive in, but she dismissed the idea bitterly. Let him scratch himself until he bled, as far as she was concerned. Thomas, on the other hand, didn't take his eyes off her. His furrowed brow seemed to blame her for those men's regression to childhood. It wasn't her fault, but she knew it. As long as he watched, escape was impossible. Cunning as a fox, he observed her with relentless patience. Resigned, Nòraid slowly returned to shallower waters, though she stopped at a safe distance from the shore where Thomas ordered her to stay. There she pretended to carefully scrub a non-existent stain on her dress, as if that small task absorbed her completely. From time to time she lifted her eyes toward the old guard, watching his every move. Then she dove in with a single motion, submerging her head and hair, emerging with curls wet and shining in the sun. Thomas kept watching, unmoving. She repeated the gesture, lingering longer underwater. She pretended to enjoy the bath, prolonging the wait, trying to wear down the old man's attention. Everything was strategy. A game of patience. Because the moment would come. And when it did, she would swim with the fury of a cornered animal, breaking through toward freedom. When she surfaced for the second time, Thomas watched her warily, his eyes fixed like a hawk, fearing it might lose its prey. Nòraid, however, feigned calm, simply continuing her slow washing motions until she sensed the old man's suspicion beginning to loosen. She dived again and again, growing more confident each time, until when she broke the surface she saw him distracted, talking with Caoilinn and MacAilpein. The moment had come. Without another thought she plunged deep, pushing her body into the watery darkness toward the horses. She prayed silently, begging the Almighty that her calculations hadn't betrayed her, for she sensed she would have no other chance. She opened her eyes beneath the icy water, and swam with all the strength in her limbs, praying her trail would not betray her on the surface. When she finally reached the opposite shore, she emerged slowly, hidden among branches and reeds.
Her heart nearly burst with joy as she heard the sweet breathing of the horses, their warm snorts in the night air.
"Thank you, Lord," she whispered, a breath that was both prayer and relief.
But there was no time.
She knew Thomas would notice her absence in moments and raise the alarm. She hurried through bushes and roots without daring to look back. She picked a horse at random, and untied the reins with trembling hands. Only when she placed her foot in the stirrup did she discover in horror that the poor Echan's body was tied sloppily to the horse, swaying like a ghost. She couldn't change mounts. There was no time. With a determined gesture she climbed onto the croup, positioning herself in front of the corpse. The horse, irritated by the wet weight and the contact of soaked clothes, snorted and thrashed violently. Then the scream rang out. A piercing howl tore through the air, and she knew she had been discovered. Panic seized her. She dug her heels into the horse's flanks. The steed reared back, splashing into the water, then reared up again, furious. Nòraidh clung desperately to its back, as if her soul depended on it. She felt Echan's weight slip, and suddenly the lifeless body crashed into the lake with a mournful splash. Freed from that burden, the horse galloped fiercely, carrying her toward freedom. Behind her, shouts and curses rose, followed by the sound of men splashing to rescue the dead. She didn't dare look back until the horse's gallop had carried her beyond the first clearing. Then, turning her head, she saw the most grotesque sight of her life, a horde of naked warriors, soaked, furious and clumsy, chasing her like mad ghosts from some ancient saga. Some turned toward the horses, but it was already too late. Too late. A wild rush of joy surged through her. The certainty of freedom intoxicated her so much she couldn't hold back. She burst into a nearly hysterical, vibrant laugh, watching those men in all their naked ridiculousness fall behind with every stride. And so, laughing and trembling at once, she ran toward the unknown, determined not to stop even if the sun caught her still fleeing. Chapter 22. The Stolen Wife. Never, in all his years of campaigning, had Coinneach MacCoinnich imagined such a spectacle upon his return. When he pulled on the reins and fixed his gaze on the plain, the first thing he wondered was what kind of witchcraft that girl had used to strip a whole 30 Highland men of their clothes. By Christ's blood! He had feared to find them out of their minds, perhaps even with the girl dead at their feet, but not this, the maiden fleeing on a stolen horse, and behind her the throng of naked warriors shouting wildly, running like possessed men, a private swinging with each stride. Some clumsily tried to cover themselves with one hand while waving the other, screaming for the girl to return. Others, more stubborn, had hastily mounted without caring about their nakedness, chasing her at full gallop, as naked as the day they were born.
"Father, what the hell are they doing?"
Arhane asked incredulously, his voice still young. "Heaven strike me if I know, son," Coinneach replied after a moment, not taking his eyes off the bizarre scene. "By the living God, I have no idea." He didn't know whether to burst out laughing or curse, so he stood still, stunned, watching how a simple woman had thrown his entire host into disorder. And he had no time to ponder it, because Arhane, with the sharpness of the obvious, added, "Whatever it is, father, Nòraidh is running." "Saints in heaven," cursed Coinneach. "You're right." He immediately handed the boy to Siamers, and ordered them to return to camp. Then he dug in his spurs and gave chase to the fugitive. "Damn you and damn your stubbornness," he growled through clenched teeth. "Why not let her go? It would only cost a horse, and the girl would soon find her way back to her father's walls, following the torn strips of cloth she had left behind. She could be free, and he could have peace of mind. So why didn't he? The truth was simple and brutal: he didn't want to. An unfamiliar unease gripped him as he watched her fade away. That vision was like a closing door, a breath of darkness drawing near. He leaned forward, spurred his mount, and in a few heartbeats was at her side. The girl, focused only on the naked men still chasing her, didn't see him coming. Coinneach stretched out his arm, let out a roar, and lifted her from the saddle as if she were air. Nòraidh's scream tore through the afternoon. For a moment, stunned by surprise, she didn't resist.
But when she recognized her captor, fury shook her.
Soaked and trembling, she fought against the wall of muscle pressing her down. "Let me go," she shouted with all the rage in her lungs. "For all the saints, let me go now." "No, girl," he growled, his voice rough as iron scraping stone. "I warned you, and I won't break my word.
You're crazy, she spat, struggling.
Don't you understand you could have killed me? Coinneach was silent. He had no answer because there had been no reason in his chest, only the blinding impulse to stop her escape. That same emptiness had cut him when Isabel threw herself into the void, but then he had understood the nature of loss. Now he did not. At least you could have warned me, the girl insisted, her eyes flashing with anger. Warn you? He replied with a bitter smile. Give you a chance to dodge me. I'm not that foolish. He galloped without looking back. His men would soon recover the horse she had stolen. What he urgently needed was to get her away from prying eyes, obscene laughter, and the cold that chilled her soaked clothes. Nòraid deserved privacy. And he wanted her close. Why won't you let me go, she whispered, her voice a thread of fury and plea. Coinneach didn't know what to answer. It wasn't just the duty to save her from her father. It was her. She who, with a fleeting glance, had dispelled the shadows in his heart. He pressed her against his chest like a young man seized by first love. He felt the heat of her skin beneath the wet fabric, traced the delicate curve of her waist, the tremble of her ribs. His fingers, without permission, followed the line of her body, until they brushed the fullness of her breast.
Let me go, she murmured, now trembling in her voice.
I can't, girl, he confessed with a tremor that wasn't cold. I can't. It was a blessed torment, that desire consuming him. A torment from which he did not want to be redeemed. You could, she replied with a sob. If you wanted, you could.
But she did not pull away when he bowed his head and buried himself in the scent of her neck.
The moan that escaped her lips was no longer anger but surprise. And there lies the dilemma, Nòraid, Coinneach whispered against her skin, reverence and hunger intertwined.
That I fear I don't want to.
He felt her shudder beneath his touch, stiff with confusion. And yet, that tension revealed a dangerous truth, she did matter to him. I desire you, girl, he confessed, his voice breaking into a murmur. I desire you more than I should. The world seemed to stop. Nòraid's cry broke off abruptly. And suddenly, the air thickened between them as if fate itself awaited the next word. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, she became aware of every vibration in the chest of the man against whom her back rested. MacCoinnich's hand continued exploring her with slow, firm caresses, sending delicious shivers through her, and God have mercy on his soul, she wished those fingers would never stop, that he would do with her whatever his will commanded. Whatever it was. Yes, they were dark thoughts, almost sacrilegious.
But she didn't care.
She thought her heart would burst with joy at that whispered confession, he desired her. It didn't matter if it was a fleeting impulse. She desired him too. And she understood with sudden clarity that she would die if she didn't keep from him at least one moment, one burning memory to carry with her into old age, when she had nothing left but memories to cling to. When the man's thumb brushed the edge of her chest, then enclosed it with delicate firmness, Nòraid entwined her trembling fingers with his and turned her face to meet his gaze. MacCoinnich's eyes burned like molten gold, shining with hunger and promises. That look wrapped around her, seduced her, captured her. And she wanted him to know it, to convey without words her surrender, her longing to be held, to be kissed. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, broken by passion. Tell me now, if you want me to stop. Her throat closed, unable to make a sound, but Nòraid shook her head slightly, trusting he would understand her silent answer. And he did. He knew it when his lips descended to her neck, biting gently, licking her skin with eagerness. Ah, girl, murmured the chieftain, his breath burning the delicate curve of her throat. Are you sure? His hand returned to her chest, pressing it with unexpected tenderness, as if that gesture sealed his question. Nòraid, in response, guided that same hand against herself, an explicit invitation for him to continue, trembling with every caress that traveled over her. MacCoinnich closed his eyes like a man tormented, and let out a deep growl against her skin. He lifted his face to the sky as if begging the gods for strength, while his fingers worshipped the soft flesh beneath his palm's control. The girl watched him fascinated, the tension in his jaw, the movement of his throat, the tamed fierceness in every gesture. It was as if he had waited his whole life for this moment. When he finally tilted his head, his lips covered Nòraidh's with a force that completely swept her away. She thought she would die from pleasure. Her body surrendered, and a tremor shook her intimacy. MacCoinnich could have done with her whatever he wished, and she would have accepted it joyfully. He truly desired her. And she knew it, in his gaze, in the way he touched her, in the passion with which he devoured her. And she desired him. His tongue parted the barrier of her lips, and entered her mouth to taste her. Nòraidh moaned, surrendered. And when he growled too, intoxicated by delight, it seemed to her that her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and her body burned like a brazier. Suddenly, the man pulled his lips away. Only then, in that instant, did Nòraidh realize the horse had stopped. They were still in the saddle, but the world had ceased to exist while he kissed her. MacCoinnich made her feel like the only possible reality. He filled her heart. He loosened the yoke of fear that oppressed her soul. When he dismounted before her, Nòraidh understood what he intended. And when he offered her his arms, she accepted them without hesitation, her heart racing, unwilling to remember the consequences. For all the saints, she didn't want to think. She wanted to surrender. She wanted to lose herself in him. Chapter 23. After moving her just far enough to keep her safe from the horse's hooves, but no farther than necessary, Coinneach gently laid her down on a bed of golden crocus trembling in the Highland wind. He found a fierce pleasure in the clarity of that desire reflected in her eyes, in the sweet haze clouding her gaze. A part of him, the voice of duty, honor and the gods, shouted that he must stop immediately, before crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. She couldn't know what it meant to give herself to a MacCoinnich. She couldn't suspect the storm of passion her body would unleash in him. And yet, by heaven's mercy, desire swept away all reason, tearing down the walls of his will in an instant. For a long tense moment Coinneach simply watched her. He didn't blink, fearing that if he closed his eyes even for a moment, when he opened them everything would vanish like a cruel dream. Could it be that she understood? That she knew what she asked with that open, luminous look that was both surrender and challenge?
No, that's not possible, he told himself.
But it no longer mattered. He dropped to his knees beside her, leaning in until he enclosed her with his arms as if the whole world lay outside that circle. He let himself be drawn to her mouth with a hunger held too long, eager to taste her sweetness, to drink her breath as one drinks life. "You are so sweet," he murmured, his voice low, broken. "So beautifully dangerous." "No," she whispered, between a moan and a plea, closing her eyes as if surrendering to the darkness.
"Yes, girl," he replied firmly as one who pronounces an oath.
"You are." Then he deepened the kiss, sealing with it a fate neither of them could now avoid. When lineage denies her, the clan claims her. Nòraidh welcomed that sweet burning invasion of his mouth with her whole soul. She trembled with every stroke of his tongue, with every brush of lips that seemed to worship her more than kiss her. She had never felt the object of such adoration. Never in her entire life had she loved like this, but this, she reminded herself sternly, was not love. Waiting for love would only bring her sorrow. No, what ignited her in that moment was different, physical, intoxicating, perversely delicious. And though she tried to convince herself otherwise, she knew her desire was crying out for something more, something she shouldn't hope for when that hope shattered, the wound would consume her. Meanwhile, Coinneach burned with desire. He wanted nothing more than to give her pleasure, to draw sighs from her and hold her close. He watched her, his face flushed with passion, and wished with the force of a vow that she would look at him that way forever. But he knew lust alone does not bind the heart. He had learned that with Isabel. At night his wife had yielded, but by day she had loathed him for the very reason she had surrendered. And when she bore him a son, he had lost her forever. May the gods curse him if he let that happen again. Before Isabel, many had loved him. After her, none. Because he could never forget. This act, he promised himself, would not be for himself but for Nòraidh. For her he would keep the giving and the joy. For him, only the privilege of witnessing the miracle of her passion would remain. With reverent delicacy, he lifted her arm and covered it with tiny kisses, as if afraid to break that sensitive skin. He made her shiver until she closed her eyes, overcome by his will. He reached her hand, kissed it, tasted it with his tongue, gently biting the soft flesh of her thumb. Nòraidh's tremble encouraged him. Then he grasped both her wrists above her head with one hand, trapping her beneath the shadow of his body. But Nòraidh felt no coolness, she was aflame. Everything in her was fire. Every sense seemed sharpened to delirium. The touch of the breeze, the warmth of a stray sunbeam, the birdsong in the trees, the murmur of grass bending beneath them, the fleeting scent of crocus, the intense masculine smell of cognac. All mingled in the same spell. When he lowered his face toward her neck, she arched her body in a gesture of surrendered boldness, offering herself, moaning as she felt his lips eagerly roam her. Like an artist in a trance, he left no corner unadored, covering her with kisses until Nòraidh felt her very soul torn away to merge with his. "Why yes," she murmured, and hearing her cognac trembled. His mouth descended fervently to her chest, and the girl stifled a cry. For a moment a reckless desire struck her, that he tear that coarse dress and possess her skin to skin. She wanted to feel him without barriers, with the urgency of one burning on the edge of longing. But cognac continued downward, freeing her hands to clasp her waist and cover her with kisses, one after another, while she moaned in an ecstasy beyond herself. She lifted the dress with desperate hands, silently begging, encouraging him without words. Then she cried out in pure exultation when his lips found her bare belly. The kiss paused there, still burning, as if drinking from her skin. Nòraidh held him, begging that he never pull away. And he went on, descending to her thighs, nibbling, kissing, until he sank into the deepest intimacy of her being. Nòraidh let out a muffled moan, shaken by a pleasure that lifted her to the threshold of paradise. Her body trembled, her heart burst into wild beats. "Oh yes," she gasped, lost. "Oh God, yes. You are so sweet," he whispered against her, tasting her with surrender, with sacred hunger. She writhed, unable to bear more. "I beg you," she murmured between sobs of pleasure, not knowing what she asked, only aware it was more, always more. His hands roamed her, lifted her, possessed her with a strength both tender and brutal at once. The whole world shrank to that moment, to that body burning over his, on the edge of a glory never reached. And suddenly, cognac groaned. A hoarse moan full of torment. He pulled away, gently laying her on the grass. Nòraidh opened her eyes, lost, and found him kneeling before her, his face shadowed, eyes feverish, chest heaving as after battle. "I desire you, girl," he murmured, his voice broken, pleading. "More than I have ever desired anything in my life." Chapter 24. Christ, he could no longer hold back. He had believed he could resist, but the truth tore him apart. His desire for that young woman was consuming him alive. Every fiber of his body burned, aching with longing, crying out for her. Nòraidh hesitated for a moment, her face flushed, before bowing her head in a gesture of consent. Coinneach, however, doubted she fully understood what she was accepting, and yet he wanted to believe it. "Are you sure, girl?" he asked, his voice rough, broken by desire. She didn't answer with words, but raised her trembling hands to his waist. Her eyes, wide and immense, stayed fixed on his, and that contact was enough to tear down the last defenses of the warrior. With a brusque motion he untied the sash and threw it far away, fearing at once that she might regret it, and that she never would. Christ, he desired her like he had never desired anything before. Every muscle in his body tensed when she barely touched the tartan. It was a light touch, but for him it was a solemn command. He shed the fabric without hesitation, letting it fall to the grass. He knelt before her, covered only by a short tunic, which soon met the same fate. He revealed himself to the young woman in all the rawness of his nakedness, because he needed her to see the truth of his desire, to understand the irrevocability of the moment. If she was to refuse him, it had to be then. Because one more kiss would seal their fate, and from that instant onward there would be no turning back. Nòraidh felt her throat tighten at the sight of that naked body, sculpted by sun and war. Her eyes, despite her efforts, dropped to the undeniable evidence of his manhood, and modesty made her blush. She swallowed hard. How could a man like that desire her? The emotion overwhelmed her like a wave. She almost wanted to cry for joy. A part of her longed to strip off her dress and surrender with the same nakedness, but the fear that he might judge her insufficient held her back. She remained still, captivated by the beauty of the warrior watching her. "Do you want me to stop?" he murmured, his voice rough with a restrained plea. She immediately shook her head, raising her eyes to his, troubled by the intensity of that gaze. "No," she whispered, and with a barely audible voice she dared to ask, "And you?" A dangerous, disarming smile appeared on MacCoinnich's lips. "No, girl. Neither do I." He offered her a hand, firm and warm. She hesitated just a second before placing hers in his. He lifted her in an almost ritual gesture, kneeling before her. Her eyes drifted, overcome by curiosity, toward the manhood that proclaimed him a man in all his strength. "Tell me, do you think I'm willing to stop?" He laughed, deep and vibrant. Nòraid blushed even more, but her eyes sought his. She couldn't answer. He wrapped his arms around her waist, closing his eyes for a moment as if to imprint the sensation of holding her in his hands. She also surrendered to that contact, tilting her head back, though she didn't look away because she didn't want to miss a single gesture of that moment. When Coinneach's eyes opened again, they shone like amber in the sun. "I want to see all of you," he said in a whisper that was both a plea and a command. Nòraid could only nod, and he brought his hands to the hem of her skirt, lifting it slowly, as if every fold he revealed were a sacrament. She let him, eager for what she was about to receive. With a firm motion, he pulled off her dress and the torn petticoat. The wet fabric fell to the ground, forgotten. Coinneach gazed at her, and the smile that lit his face was a flash of glory. "You are beautiful," he murmured with burning reverence. Nòraid wanted to throw herself into his arms and weep, but when he leaned toward her, she met him with total surrender, raising her arms in a gesture of joyful submission. The touch of his mouth on her skin made her tremble. He traced her breasts, her neck, her lips. The world spun at a new speed when he kissed her with overflowing passion, and she clung to him as if to an inevitable fate. Coinneach laid her down again on the grass, covering her with the weight of his body, and his lips and hands continued to explore her with insatiable hunger. Nòraid, trembling, instinctively parted her legs as his fingers slid between them. The growing pressure of his body against hers tore a moan from her throat that vanished into the night air. The first thrust came without warning. His hands gripped her hips as he plunged in suddenly, smothering her cry of pain with kisses. The depth of that union drew a scream from her, her head thrown back. "Say the word and I will stop," Coinneach whispered against her mouth, kissing her with desperate fever. "It's not too late. If you ask, I will obey." Nòraid's body shuddered beneath his, soaked in cold sweat. But she shook her head firmly, welcoming both the pain and the ecstasy. She wanted everything from him. Everything. Because she knew that this first time would also be the last and definitive. The pain soon gave way to a sweet, almost sacred burning. Coinneach stayed still inside her, waiting for her unspoken response. And it was she who began to move, guided by instinct, in search of that glory she had just touched. Highlands' oath. Coinneach groaned, torn by a delight so deep it bordered on pain. He hadn't meant to move so soon, but her insistence, her fiery surrender, swept him away like a raging river, stealing his will drop by drop. And by all the saints, he desired her. He wanted her. Wanted her whole. He could no longer hold back. He thrust again and again, with an almost mechanical force, until the fog in his mind began to clear, revealing the weight of what he was doing. He tried to pull away for the maiden Saka, but she raised her legs, holding him close with the strength of a silent vow. Coinneach let out a roar, shuddering to his bones. He gathered every shred of control left to him. He must not spill inside her. Though his heart threatened to burst in his chest, he continued firmly until he felt the young woman break in his arms, swept away by the tide of pleasure. Nòraid's body arched, trembling, and a sharp cry softened into a surrendered sigh. Then and only then Coinneach pulled away from her, careful not to mark her with the seal of his seed. Exhausted and sated, he let himself fall onto her body, breathing in the wild scent floating between them, sweat grass, the cold wind brushing her back. He was overwhelmed by a gratitude no lifetime could repay. He felt the bond woven between them, now unbreakable, as if the earth itself had joined them. With the sweet awkwardness of a boy in love, he reached out and plucked a yellow crocus growing beside them. He offered it to her. She accepted in silence, and he buried his face in the curve of her neck, wrapping her in his arms. She was his now. He had made her his. And he swore, with his life as his pledge, that he would never make her regret this union. Chapter 25. A love born in the Highlands, stronger than blood. While the others waited like fools, wasting time with their thumbs intertwined, those two had lain together. Damn it. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he never would have believed it. Coinneach should have punished her like the insolent bitch she was, yet he had returned with her asleep in his arms as if cradling an innocent child. After all the chaos that woman had sown, Angus had expected, no, had hoped, that his brother would have kicked her back to their father or thrown her into the pit like the waste she was. But no. Coinneach, the sentimental fool, had gone and picked flowers for the Sassenach, and she still clutched one of those yellow petals between her fingers, even in her dreams. Nothing went as planned. Nothing. By then, Angus should have been rid of that bastard Coinneach. Yet the boy was still breathing. And the woman, who should never have caused any trouble, had become an obstacle. To hell with Coinneach and his soft heart. He watched with burning anger as Cailín and Tormod loaded Echan's soaked body, freshly rescued from the lake, onto a horse. They tied the lifeless figure to the saddle, while the girl would ride alongside Coinneach and Arthur beside old Thomas. Angus could do nothing but watch, condemned to impotence. He had hoped that Nòraidh and Arthur would share a saddle. Another disappointment. He hated this feeling of weakness and blamed Coinneach for it. Miserable. He was just like their father, convinced that sacrifice is ignoble. The old laird, that damned bastard, had even sacrificed one of his own sons without flinching. Angus, however, would right that wrong. First Arthur, then Coinneach. Then the clan would be his. It was his right, after so many years of silence and suffering. Did the old man really think his deception would remain hidden? That Angus would accept the lie with resignation? The old man had stolen his mother from him, and worse still, the right to mourn her. Coinneach at least had seen her face for 2 years, Angus never had. They took everything from him, even the mourning. And while Coinneach received their father's love and the training to inherit the clan, he grew up a pariah, condemned to bitterness. It was Blanid, tormented by guilt, who finally confessed the truth, the bastard son of a MacAilpein. The disgrace they had all conspired to hide. Every MacCoinnich, one after another, had preferred the lie over acknowledging it. None dared defend his rights.
But the time for silence was over.
Those still alive would pay. Blanid, the others, all of them. And then when blood had been spilled, Angus would finally be free. Not to forgive, but to live unchained. There was a cruel irony in it all. The old man, in his zeal to protect Coinneach, had condemned him to carry a guilt that wasn't his own, to believe his mother's death was caused by his birth, when it was Angus who had torn her from this world. Let that fool keep believing it, carrying that burden to his grave. He had also awaited Isabel's end. How much he had wished it. He had done everything possible to make her die in childbirth. But no, the stupid woman chose to throw herself from the window. She robbed him of the satisfaction of deciding her fate. And yet in that death he found a consolation. She had torn Coinneach apart in a way no other wound could. Since then his brother had lain with no woman. Until now. Angus smiled. Fate was offering him a new chance to break that son of a bitch, before killing him. The only dilemma was the order: would the son die first, or the lover? Or maybe both. At once. Chapter 26. Where the land demands loyalty, the heart claims love. Nòraidh had been awake for a long time, though she still pretended to be asleep. She didn't yet feel strong enough to face Coinneach, much less the accusations his men had thrown at him when they saw him return with her in his arms. She had heard their fury, their reproach over poor Ichan's desecrated body, and guilt weighed on her chest like a stone. It hadn't been her intention, God knew it, that the corpse would fall into the lake's waters. It was an accident, nothing more. And yet, against all reason, her heart had burst with joy when Coinneach MacCoinnich had come to her defense. The warrior, with a stern voice, had ordered his men to be silent. And with that gesture, he had given Nòraidh a moment of bliss. The truth was, she didn't want to leave the refuge of his arms. Not yet. He held her as if she were a lost treasure, a sleeping angel, and that embrace reminded her more of paradise than the white clouds the bards often described. No, she didn't want to wake. She wanted to cling to Coinneach, and to the illusion of an impossible love. The way he brushed her hair from her face, the firmness with which he held her close to his chest, it all made her feel love. And yet, she knew it was a mirage. The moment she opened her eyes, she would once again be the captive of a MacCoinnich, not his lover. Oh, but how beautiful that moment had been. She would keep forever the memory of his surrender, every glance, every caress, every shared breath. On lonely nights, leaning at her chamber window, she would no longer dream of impossibilities. It would be enough to recall that crocus she still held between her fingers, maybe withered, but forever fresh to her, stained with the bright yellow of dawn. It would be enough to remember the tenderness with which he placed it in her hand, as if in that gesture he had pronounced a vow. She would have liked to cry, but she didn't dare. She didn't want him to know she was awake. The path was growing steeper, and Nòraidh sighed with happiness as she felt him hold her tighter. Through her half-closed lashes, she saw the sky turn red and pink against the pale blue of twilight. The sun kissed the heather-covered hills, with the tenderness of a mother bidding her child to sleep. She clung to her dark savior then, finding safety in the strength of his arms. Pretending to sleep gave her an unexpected courage. Her hand, resting on the broad back of the warrior, lingered exploring the hardness of his muscles, the noble architecture of a body forged for battle. She sighed, remembering him naked before her, imposing and wild like a Celtic god. No one had ever looked at her that way. Coinneach's eyes could break the strength of any woman. They had burned over her, with the arrogant certainty of a man who knows what he wants and how to get it. They had stripped her more than his hands, stealing secrets, claiming her heart as much as her body. A shiver ran through her, recalling those caresses, those lips that promised forbidden worlds, and fulfilled every promise. Holy heaven, how much pleasure he had drawn from her, how much delight he himself had found, judging by the dark, satisfied smile that lit his mouth afterward. And still he took her again, with the same intensity, with the same passion. A soft moan escaped Nòraidh, disguised as sleepiness. She turned to bury her face in his chest, but it was a mistake. She breathed in the scent of his skin and was lost. She wished she could stay like that forever. But it was impossible. All of it would vanish very soon. She felt tears burning her eyelids. Foolishness, she told herself. How could she love a man she barely knew? And yet, she believed she did. How could she have given herself with such purity, answering his fire without a single doubt? No, it wasn't love. It couldn't be. Just desire, she repeated to herself. Then why did the tears keep falling? Why did her heart suddenly feel as heavy as the stone of an ancient tomb? Coinneach tensed as he felt Nòraidh's fingers brush against his back. He lowered his gaze, trying to discern if she was truly asleep, or if that gentle touch was a deception. It wasn't a casual gesture, but the absent-minded caress of a lover, capable of igniting his fire and quickening his heartbeat. Maybe the girl was already awake, but she didn't open her eyes. It didn't matter. He liked carrying her in his arms. She was so light, so delicate, so vulnerable despite her feigned toughness. At first she had seemed untamable, as firm as the stone walls built by her father, but it only took moving a single block for everything to crumble. After having loved her with intensity, the young woman had fallen surrendered in his arms, asleep, while he brushed the wet strands away from her face. And more than the memory of her surrender, what moved him was the trust, that boldness to abandon herself to sleep in his arms. For Coinneach, that quiet faith was a gift more precious than any treasure. A gift he had never received from Isabel. His wife had never offered him trust, not even when they shared the same bed. Coinneach remembered her immediate steps toward the window, her stifled cries, the shudder of disgust after their wedding night. He had bled in silence, watching her hate even the child she carried in her womb, as if it were an abomination. Since then, there had been no more words or caresses between them. And yet, their son had been born like a magnificent vision, free, passionate, incapable of fearing love. Arhane was everything Coinneach had dreamed of in an heir. He looked again at the girl sleeping against his chest. He remembered her confusion when he called her Lilias. The shy acceptance of that name seemed a balm to his soul. She had opened doors in his heart he thought sealed forever. He reached out without touching her, and traced the curve of her belly with the palm of his hand, imagining it swollen with their child. The very thought filled him with joy. He had never dared dream it, and now he wanted it with all his soul. He wanted to repeat their union not for mere pleasure, but to give her a child and share with her everything life had denied him with Isabel, to feel the first movements beneath his hand, to kiss the curve where life grew, to watch the changes in her body naked at dawn and dusk. A soft laugh escaped his lips as he recalled Thomas's look when he saw him return to camp with the girl in his arms, a mix of scandal and resigned approval. The old man had urged him for years to find a woman, though he probably would have preferred one more docile. Coinneach laughed again to himself. He had thought he wanted that, until that witch appeared. Because that's what she was, fire. Not a submissive maiden, but passion incarnate. Every emotion, rage, desire, maybe love, burned in her with fierce intensity. And it was precisely that fury of life that chained him to her. His cousin, on the other hand, looked at him with open disapproval. Too bad for him. Coinneach had long ago decided to forge his own destiny, and Angus would have to get used to the Sassenach's presence, just like everyone else. He had no intention of letting her go. Though thinking of Angus, his expression darkened. Lately he had seemed strange, withdrawn. Especially since the quarrel with the old MacAilpein over his daughter. Maybe he should intervene himself, though the idea disgusted him. Perhaps there was still hope for his cousin. Or maybe not, since the old MacAilpein hated him, and his mediation would only reopen the wound. Father! Father! Arhane's sharp cry tore through him like an axe blow. Coinneach spun around instantly, his heart in his throat. He saw his son safe and sound, pointing furiously toward the slope. Eachan's falling. Eachan's falling. Coinneach frowned. Hard to imagine Eachan plotting anything, he was dead. But following Arhane's finger, he understood. The body still wrapped in tartan had slipped from the saddle, the chair had broken, and the corpse tumbled downhill, unraveling in a grotesque descent.
Christ, murmured Coinneach.
If any man had ever brought a curse upon himself, it was Eachan. Some warriors dismounted, and ran after the wandering body for the second time that day. Coinneach cursed and lowered his gaze, only to find Nòraidh's eyes open, fixed on him.
It wasn't me, she exclaimed immediately.
Chapter 27. Blood divides. The clan protects. Love redeems. Coinneach tensed as he felt Nòraidh's fingers brush against his back. He lowered his gaze, trying to tell if she was truly asleep or if that gentle touch was a deception. It wasn't a casual gesture, but the absent-minded caress of a lover, capable of igniting his fire and quickening his heartbeat. Maybe the girl was already awake, but she didn't open her eyes. It didn't matter. He liked carrying her in his arms. She was so light, so delicate, so vulnerable despite her feigned toughness. At first she had seemed untamable, as firm as the stone walls built by her father, but it only took moving one block for everything to crumble. After having loved her with passion, the young woman had fallen surrendered in his arms, asleep while he brushed the damp strands from her face. And more than the memory of her surrender, what moved him was the trust, that boldness to give herself over to sleep in his arms. For Coinneach, that quiet faith was a gift more precious than any treasure. A gift he had never received from Isabel. His wife had never offered him trust, not even when they shared the same bed. Coinneach remembered her immediate steps to the window, her stifled sobs, the shudder of disgust after their wedding night. He had bled in silence, watching her hate even the child she carried in her womb, as if it were an abomination. Since then, there had been no more words or caresses between them. Yet their son had been born like a magnificent vision, free, passionate, incapable of fearing love. Arhane was everything Coinneach had dreamed of in an heir. He looked again at the girl sleeping against his chest. He remembered her confusion when he called her Lilius. Her shy acceptance of that name seemed a balm to his soul. She had opened doors in his heart he thought sealed forever. He extended a hand, without touching her, and traced the outline of her belly with his palm, imagining it swollen with their child. The very thought filled him with joy. He had never dared dream it, and now he wanted it with all his soul. He wanted to repeat their union, not for mere pleasure, but to give her a child and share with her everything life had denied him with Isabel, to feel the first movements beneath his hand, to kiss the curve where life grew, to watch the changes in her body naked at dawn and dusk. A soft laugh escaped his lips as he recalled Thomas's look when he saw him return to camp with the girl in his arms, a mix of scandal and resigned approval. The old man had urged him for years to find a woman, though he probably would have preferred one more docile. Coinneach laughed again to himself. He had thought he wanted that, until that witch appeared. Because that was what she was, fire. Not a submissive maiden, but passion incarnate. Every emotion, rage, desire, maybe love, burned in her with fierce intensity. And it was precisely that fury of life that chained him to her. His cousin, on the other hand, looked at him with open disapproval. Too bad for him. Coinneach had long ago decided to forge his own path, and Angus would have to get used to the Sassenach's presence, just like everyone else. He had no intention of letting her go. Though thinking of Angus, his expression darkened. Lately he had seemed strange, withdrawn. Especially since the quarrel with old MacAilpein over his daughter. Maybe he should intervene himself, though the idea disgusted him. Perhaps there was still hope for his cousin. Or maybe not, since the old MacAilpein hated him, and his mediation would only reopen the wound. Father! Father! Artane's sharp cry tore through him like an axe blow. Coinneach spun around instantly, his heart in his throat. He saw his son safe and sound, pointing furiously toward the slope. Ichan's falling. Ichan's falling. Coinneach frowned. Hard to imagine Ichan plotting anything, he was dead. But following Artane's finger, he understood. The body still wrapped in tartan had slipped from the saddle, the chair had broken, and the corpse tumbled downhill, unraveling in a grotesque descent.
Christ, murmured Coinneach.
If any man had ever brought a curse upon himself, it was Ichan. Some warriors dismounted, and ran after the wandering body for the second time that day. Coinneach cursed and lowered his gaze, only to find Nòraidh's eyes open, fixed on him.
It wasn't me, she exclaimed immediately.
Not a single calm face among the men who stared at Ichan's body. Between the wolves that had torn him, the fall into the lake, the soaked plaid and the tumble down the hill, the deceased looked pitiful. Nòraidh stood silently, her expression twisted in a grimace of disgust at the sight of the mutilated corpse. A sting of guilt pierced her chest, knowing that in part the state of the dead man was due to her actions. God knew her father always said she could trouble even the souls of the dead, and that particular corpse seemed to have suffered terribly from her presence.
But she wouldn't take all the blame.
She hadn't killed him or called the wolves. True, she had let him fall into the lake during her escape, and the soaked tartan had undoubtedly worsened his appearance. For heaven's sake! He had never been a handsome man in life, and now he looked grotesque. She wrinkled her nose and turned away, thankful for her strong stomach. I'm not putting him on my horse, Tormod suddenly exclaimed, his voice thick with disgust. Nor am I, Caeline added brusquely. Just looking at him turns my stomach. Nòraidh glanced toward Beethan, curious. The giant, who usually faced death without blinking, was kneeling at a distance, turned away, vomiting with a noise that startled her. It was the first time she'd heard such sounds from him. Though she hadn't planned to intervene, she approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked quietly. Beithan lifted his face, disoriented, sweat beading his forehead. "Help me, throw up my soul," he replied with a grimace. "Why would you want to help me, woman?" Nòraid shrugged, offering a shy smile. "Because you're not as terrible as you pretend to be." He raised an eyebrow, incredulous.
"And who says that?"
"I do," she answered boldly, holding his gaze.
"And I thank you for trying to protect me this morning."
Beithan. Orc. The nickname so many used as an insult sounded different coming from her mouth. The giant snorted, almost amused. "Sassenach," he said, without a trace of hostility. "Orc," Nòraid replied, with a hint of a smile. A fleeting flash appeared at Beithan's lips.
"Ah, it didn't help much," he scoffed.
"You haven't gotten far, it seems." A flush rose on Nòraid's face as she remembered how the laird had caught her, and she hurriedly changed the subject. "Do you feel better now?" The question came out more sincere than she intended. For some reason it mattered that these men, even the surly Beithan, didn't judge her with disdain. He frowned sharply, hardening again. "Don't worry about me. Leave me alone." Nòraid glared at him, muttering to herself. What lunatics these men were. She turned to the group, convinced it was no wonder the clans were always at war, they were all beasts. "Christ above, it stinks worse than hell itself." MacAilpein grunted, though he didn't take his eyes off the corpse. Like the others, he seemed trapped by a morbid fascination.
"It doesn't even look like Ichan anymore,"
Angus murmured, with a supposedly pained gravity. But Nòraid sensed something else in his gaze, not grief but hatred. Hatred directed at her. She shivered under that dark glare. "Poor devil," muttered Thomas. "I'm not carrying him on my saddle," MacAilpein insisted. "Poor bastard," another replied. And the phrase spread from mouth to mouth, repeated like a dry prayer. A heavy silence fell over them, as the men fixed their gaze on Ichan's body. "Coinneach, maybe we should leave him here," Tormod finally suggested. "No," the laird replied sharply. "He will have a proper burial. We won't leave him to the wolves or the crows." Tormod hesitated, uncomfortable. I couldn't carry him." Nòraid understood, she didn't feel capable herself.
"But someone would have to."
And Coinneach's stern face, the firmness of his decision, made her hesitate. "Ichan will travel with us," the laird insisted, locking eyes with his men.
"For all the saints, Coinneach."
Tormod stomped his foot like a rebellious child.
"I don't want to carry him."
The leader's reply cut like a blade. "And what would you prefer me to say to his mother? Do you want to be the one to tell her we left her only son's body to the scavengers?" Tormod's face flushed with shame. He lowered his head, muttering an inaudible excuse. Nòraid felt the tension of the group on her skin. No one wanted to march with a corpse. Yet no one wanted to see Coinneach consumed by anger either. Her own instinct, forged in years of enduring her father's fury, pushed her to speak before she could stop herself. I will carry him with me," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. An absolute silence fell over the group. All eyes turned to her, incredulous. Nòraid bit her lip. Perhaps this way she would lighten Coinneach's burden, and gain a shred of acceptance from these men. Even if they weren't her people. Even if the very idea filled her with disgust inside. "No, it won't be a problem for me," she lied with difficulty, her face pale. The warriors looked at her, as if facing an apparition. Some flushed, others frowned with open doubt. She searched for Coinneach with her eyes, hoping for a sign. But she found him somber, as if her words had broken an unspoken code of his clan. A chill ran down her spine. What had she done? Chapter 28. Coinneach stared at her, stunned, unable to believe what he had just heard. He had been about to order them to load Ichan's body onto his horse's saddle, when the young woman surprised him with that unexpected offer. Not even if she had been one of his own kin would he have believed it possible. None of his men, friends, or comrades of Ichan wanted to bear that funeral burden. And yet she was willing to do it. The shock was unanimous. Coinneach's men looked at her with wide eyes, as if they didn't trust what they had heard. If he hadn't been so furious with them, Coinneach might have laughed at their faces. By all the heavens, what a woman! In that moment, he admired her with a new intensity. He wanted to pull her to his chest and devour her lips. And even more, in her fierceness there was something divine. She was trembling with fear, yes, but she radiated an iron will. Her worn and tattered dress seemed like brocade when it hugged her body. Her eyes, so large and dark, burned into him with a mixture of fear and resolve. And her lips. Coinneach remembered them burning beneath his. Desire struck him like lightning, though he masked it with a mocking gesture. Suddenly he felt gratitude toward the father who had given her to him. Nòraidh was a gift, not a burden. Fine, muttered Thomas thoughtfully. I'll do it, father. Arhane jumped in eagerly, tugging on his father's tartan. I'm strong enough already. Right, Thomas? The old man raised his eyebrows with a smirk. You've grown, yes, but not that much. To hell with it! Exploded Tormod. Let her carry him. Why should we lose a horse because of her? It's not our responsibility that her father doesn't want her. The words fell like an axe. The silence thickened. Nòraidh froze, her heart turning to ice. She turned to him incredulously. What does it mean that my father doesn't want me? Don't listen to Tormod, girl, Coinneach said sternly. But in his eyes, she read the truth. The air caught in her lungs. Is it true? My father rejected me. He was silent. And in that silence what pierced her was the one thing she couldn't bear, compassion. Compassion in Coinneach's eyes. And it was as if her chest filled with fire. Hatred for her father for abandoning her so coldly, hatred for Coinneach for hiding it, hatred for herself for having believed in impossibilities. I'll carry him, growled Beithan, pushing the others aside. I won't let her bear this. What the hell is wrong with you? He glared at Tormod. He was our friend. The murmur of the men turned into dispute. Each claimed the right to carry Ichan's remains. A ridiculous contest of brutes. Nòraidh barely heard them, she felt like ash. Her father didn't want her. He had refused to negotiate, refused even to say her name. Coinneach reached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Girl. She shook it off with a violent gesture. Don't touch me. Her voice trembled with rage. She turned to him with blazing eyes. How dare you lie to me? How dare you? Coinneach didn't answer. He looked at her silently, as if searching for words he couldn't find. Why, she spat. No need to say it. I know. Compassion. Always compassion. What did my father say? Tell me the words. They don't matter, girl, he murmured. Of course they matter, she cut him off angrily. Didn't you think I had a right to know? She remembered the moment she saw him arrive, accompanied by his son, and the troubled looks of the men. It all made sense now, the hostility, the confusion, Beithan's furtive help. The truth was before her eyes, and it was unbearable. My father refused to negotiate, right? Her voice was a blade. Coinneach's silence was crueler than any word. Refused, she pressed. He clenched his jaw, looking away. Finally, he murmured. Yes. He did. Nòraigh's legs gave way. The world turned empty. Her father didn't want her, not even as a bargaining chip. Not even as anything. What words did he use? She whispered. Coinneach looked at her, as if calculating how much she could bear. He said nothing. He just refused. She knew it was a lie. That Coinneach was hiding the worst. She knew all too well her father's cruelty. How many times had he told her she wasn't his blood, that she couldn't be his daughter, that no one could ever love her? Yes, she knew that poison. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him to leave, that she didn't need his compassion or pity.
But the words died on her lips.
Because even though it hurt, she did need it. Where the crocus blooms, love burns. What other path was left open to her? To roam like a wild beast among the shadows of the forest? To crawl to the feet of a king who might offer nothing but scorn and mockery? No, there was no choice but the one Coinneach MacCoinnich offered her. And yet, instead of feeling grateful for his shelter, Nòraidh felt an inexplicable hatred boiling in her chest. Maybe because she had witnessed the humiliation she feared most, because he had made her feel desired, only for the truth to strike her like a burning iron. No one wanted her. No one. That certainty pierced her with a sorrow she had refused to allow herself until now. For in some hidden corner of her heart, she had dared to dream that Coinneach had taken a liking to her, that he had taken her under his protection because he truly cared for her. But no. It had been only compassion. The MacCoinnich chieftain had taken her in not out of love, but because his conscience demanded it. Nothing more. And what had happened that afternoon? Ah, what a foolish deception. It had been nothing but a slip, a flight of instinct. He was a man, she a woman. He had desires that she had known how to satisfy. And God keep his soul, she had done so with surrender, with a joy she now feared to name. She looked then at her clenched fist and saw between her fingers a crushed crocus. Only then did she realize she had squeezed it with such fury that it was reduced to a shadow of itself. Its petals were torn, withered, worn like her pride. With a bitter grimace, she let it fall to the ground, as if that gesture could tear away the disdain she felt for her own weakness. She turned away without daring to look back, afraid that Coinneach might guess the shame consuming her from her face. Behind her, the men were nearly coming to blows over who would carry Eichan's body. She heard their voices, but they were distant echoes, weightless. Holy Mother, what capricious creatures these Scots were. Very well, let them tear each other apart over that cursed burden. It no longer concerned her. Eichan could crawl alone to the other world for all she cared. Nòraidh felt her steps carry her aimlessly, with the secret longing to find the nearest rock, sit upon it, and wait with cold calm for death to find her. Chapter 29. Coinneach held back the urge to run after her. He knew, with the bitter certainty of a warrior, that no words could ease the terrible pain he had seen reflected in Nòraidh's eyes. His gaze fell on the wilted flower the girl had thrown to the ground. It was crushed, its petals bent and broken, but the fact that she had kept it until that moment revealed how much it meant to her. Just as he had felt compelled to pluck it, now he felt the duty to rescue it. He bent down and, with a delicacy that seemed impossible in his strong hands, picked up the flower and tucked it into the folds of his tartan. Nòraidh is very dear to me, father, his son murmured suddenly, appearing at his side like a small dusty shadow. Coinneach lowered his gaze to that smaller, unruly version of himself and smiled. She is to me as well, son, he replied, giving him a pat on the head. But her father is cruel, Arhane added with childlike frankness. I don't like him. Coinneach's eyes searched once more for Nòraidh's figure. That's true, my son, he murmured with a hint of bitterness. I don't like him either. He shouted like a madman and was very cruel. Coinneach's heart tightened. To you, Arhane. The boy shook his head, his tiny brows furrowing. No. To her. I was about to hit him, he confessed with a hint of pride. Coinneach let out a brief laugh and tousled his hair. Really? And what stopped you? Arhane raised his eyebrows and after a moment of hesitation, admitted, I was very scared. Coinneach's smile widened at his son's raw honesty. But then came the question that struck his chest like a hammer. And were you also afraid of Nòraidh's father? Coinneach crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. He understood this was no innocent question. It was the seed of a doubt that, if not answered truthfully, could grow into insecurity in adulthood. It was the same shadow that had haunted him as a child, silenced by fear of his own father's judgment. He placed a hand on Artair's shoulder and confessed softly, Yes, Artair. I was afraid, very afraid. Not in the way the boy understood, but the dread that something might happen to him, that small piece of his soul, More than fear, he had felt fury. A rage so burning he barely thought of his own life, or that of his men. But Arhane was still too young for such distinctions. What he needed to learn was that fear was not shameful. "I went terrified, my son," he whispered. The boy nodded, and with a gesture that touched Coinneach to the core, placed his small hand on his father's shoulder. "Don't worry, father. I won't tell anyone." Coinneach laughed softly, and the bond between them sealed with that shared secret. Arhane, standing as if he suddenly felt like a man, glanced toward Nòraidh and then back at his father.
"She's a very beautiful girl, father.
Don't you think?" Coinneach nearly choked on his laughter, but managed to nod with solemn seriousness.
"Yes, son.
She is. And she sings like an angel," the boy added vehemently. Coinneach looked again at Nòraidh, sitting on a rock, and found himself nodding.
"That's true. What if we keep her with us?"
Arhane asked, with the disarming frankness of children. The laird smiled, caught by the idea and by the knowing sparkle in his son's eyes. "Do you truly want that?"
"Yes, father."
Sometimes, he hesitated for a moment before lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "sometimes I wish I had a mother who sang me to sleep." Coinneach's heart clenched with sharp pain. This time no explanation was needed. His own fractured memory whispered, "I longed for that too when I was your age." "Really? With all my soul?" Perhaps that was why, since he was a child, he had been haunted by that imaginary voice, that maternal echo that might never have existed but still echoed like a lament deep within his soul.
"Then, son, let's try to convince her together."
"You appeal to her heart. And you, which part of her will you appeal to, father?" Arhane asked with fierce innocence.
"Her mind."
"Will you make her reason bend?" Desire burned through Coinneach when his gaze fell on the young woman, sitting with one arm wrapped around her knee, the other leg stretched out, long and delicate, peeking from beneath the torn fabric of her skirt. He could almost feel the softness of that skin under his palm. A shiver ran through him, and he looked away before losing himself in the vision.
"Yes," he said in a deep voice, heavy with an impossible longing.
"That too." He winked at the boy, with a conspiratorial grin. "Coinneach!" Thomas's voice thundered suddenly. The laird turned to his men, who had gathered around Eichan's body. Thomas held up the horse's tack, his expression grim.
"You'd better come see this."
Coinneach motioned to Arhane. "Go with her. Make her smile a little." The boy nodded, his enthusiasm radiant.
"Yes, father."
He ran toward Nòraidh, who, despite her melancholy, looked up at him and eventually gave in to the irresistible smile of that dirty, chubby face. Satisfied with his son's effect, Coinneach moved toward the group. The men watched him silently as he approached, and the hairs at the nape of his neck bristled.
"What's going on?"
Thomas held out the tack. "See for yourself." Coinneach examined it carefully. At first he noticed nothing, until his eyes fell on a precisely cut arrow. He stiffened, tracing the clean slice with his finger.
"Someone cut it." "That's right," Thomas confirmed.
The men exchanged dark looks. And as suspicion grew like a shadow among them, Coinneach felt distrust begin to tear apart what held his clan together. An invisible fracture, but as dangerous as the edge of a sword. And in his chest a single question burned like red-hot iron: who?